Hello, everyone. My name is Elsbeth McSorley, and I am the marketing manager for Mega International. Thank you so much today for being here during kind of difficult and very strange times. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and joining our webinar. We're thrilled to have you all. Today's topic is EA for preventing privacy violations from the Value of EA series, a brand new series we're launching all about increasing the value of EA. Today you have two excellent presenters. We have Rashi Bhatnagar, one of Mega's pre-sales engineers, and we also have today Daniel Hebda, Mega's Chief Strategy Officer. One last note before we dive in and I hand things over to Daniel. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation today, please enter them in the GoToWebinar questions portal in the little sidebar you see. We will do our best to answer all questions at the end of the presentation, but as you have a question, feel free to put it in anytime during the presentation and we will get to Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Daniel.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. We'll dive right in here, but first, a quick note that, again, to reiterate what Elizabeth said, thank you for attending today. We know that things are a bit chaotic at many organizations, and so I would like to offer that anybody who is looking for advice or direction, methods, techniques, etc., that architecture may be able to help, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Topics like business continuity planning, cost reduction, process optimization, or redesign, I'd be happy to entertain dialogue and show you some guidance on how you can leverage architecture for that. That being said, we'll move into the topic of the presentation. So as mentioned, it's the Value of EA series, and I like to start the dialogue of value to reiterate that there is a difference between value and return on investment or cost or pure monetary views of things. So you can see here two definitions under value. First, the monetary worth of something. Second, the relative worth, utility, or importance. And I think I find within the context of enterprise architecture, often definition two is overlooked. Maybe not by the architects themselves, but by the individuals who receive the value that they produce. And so we're going to focus today on how we can shore up that second definition in the context of all the different privacy regulations and data protection regulations that are popping up around the globe, and really speak in also general terms of how enterprise architecture can really push the value of the work that they do to be better recognized. So the first step in value recognition, and I like to use the example you see pictured at the right, the inverted Jenny stamp, currently valued at nearly $1.6 million. And I use the term valued to identify that only to somebody who really has need or desire for that particular stamp is it worth that much. I'm not sure I would pay 24 cents. It's not important to me. And so that's really the aspect of value that we like to highlight. So in order for the value to be recognized in a way that's meaningful to your organization, we have to focus on the stakeholders who consume the work product or the work that you do, and that they recognize that work product or the outcome of your work as valuable. And so as you're trying to look for areas in which you can expand on the value of your enterprise architecture initiative in the context of data protection and privacy, you want to look for the chief privacy officer or someone in the organization who really has an overarching responsibility on data protection and privacy. If we go too granular in the organization and somebody dealing with one facet, maybe of one regulation, they might not understand the value of the holistic benefit architecture can offer. But when you scale up to the individual who really is trying to align and organize that broader scope and perspective, then we can really articulate value of architecture quite nicely. So if I look at a map here and I start loading up some of the different data protection and privacy regulations that have popped up around the world, and by some count, the researchers have it at near 60 different regulations now, this is where you can start to imagine that if your organization is dealing with privacy and protection from both a regulatory as well as a reputational perspective, that organizing and coordinating all of the efforts it takes to ensure adherence, especially if you're a multinational, to all of these different regulations is challenging. And this is where leveraging enterprise architecture to have a holistic view of the enterprise itself, the people, the processes, the technology, the information, and how it flows through the organization, how it's managed and stored through the organization, and the purpose the reason, the rationale for collecting and leveraging that data, then you'll have that much better of an ability to communicate. So focusing on a few aspects of regulatory compliance and breach prevention. As mentioned on the previous slide, that the number of privacy laws popping up around the globe has really made it a challenge to adhere to this. And again, I start from the regulatory, the legal perspective, but there's also the reputational angle. Your organization has to be seen by your customers as trustworthy, and that in and of itself is independent from the little regulations. So we want to make sure that can we help articulate to the privacy group as architects a comprehensive understanding of what is in place that will enable us to adhere to those different regulations? Can we support the efficient production of regulatory documentation? And can we help manage this exponential growth or intended use of data? If we look at the level of data that's collected these days, the approaches of data scientists to look for monetization of that information, to find competitive or business advantage, and ensuring that's done in an ethical manner, adhering to the different regulations, can be a severe challenge that architecture visibility can strongly support. Generally speaking, these privacy laws do have the same general objectives, so protection of individual personal data to ensure that we're not abusing or distributing that information in a way that's not been accepted, and of course, the avoidance of harm. And then last, we have to be able to, one, meet these different regulations, but two, set up a sustainable, repeatable practice to stay ahead of the privacy and protection curves, implementing things like privacy by design to ensure that the organization, as these regs continue to come out, as expectations of the customers continue to evolve, that they really are cognizant and aware. So from there, I'll jump to a perspective from Forrester and a research note. And what I like about this particular note is it highlights the emphasis we're trying to place here in the value of EA, and that is the coming together of different perspectives is demonstrating a higher level of success and value for privacy. So if I look at some of the aspects of the quote, you can see that if we look at the way the privacy team interacts with the rest of the organization, you'll see that the most successful GDPR, in this case, generally speaking, data protection and privacy initiatives, report that their security is working close with IT and data in order to achieve these high results. And what is that effect giving them? A clear and better understanding of the business context of data assets. So if you think about the architectural work you're doing on any given day, the fact that you have visibility into the strategy, the capabilities of the organization, the different business processes with the organizational interactions that occur, the technologies that are supporting and where individuals are interacting with technology, where data is involved, of course, very heavily where technology is interacting with other technology. All of this will provide that business context of data assets that can be then leveraged by the GDPR, excuse me, the CCPA and other data protection and privacy practices. Similarly, in this particular research note comes from an IT perspective. It's not even written from data protection and privacy, but there is this notion of trend that transparency and traceability must be increased in part to protect personal information, but also, as I mentioned earlier, when you're looking at AI and data science and how they're leveraging this information, it applies. And so the architecture group really needs to take a perspective on the way that they're managing, tracking emerging technologies to look ahead, again, to support the sustainable practice of data protection and privacy, to say if we're going to recommend that a technology should be incorporated into the organization's architecture, we really need to ensure that we've factored in the degree to which this may impact data protection and privacy. So what information is required for this technology to work? How would we obtain it? And is the utilization for the purpose we imagine in line with the acceptance we've received from our customer base? Many of what I'm describing are both data protection and privacy concerns, but as you can imagine, are also concretely supported by the enterprise architects. And the more that the architects can provide this level of visibility before processes and technologies are put into play, the better support for data protection and privacy the organization can have at that sustainable level. One other Gartner research note to quote here pushes a little bit about the progression we're seeing in the approach to data protection and privacy. So lower maturity, and oftentimes this would be smaller or non-global entities are still focused on the literal compliance of their local regulation. GDPR for Europe, CCPA if I'm in the United States, for example, others around the world. And so it becomes really a privacy UX focus to tick a few boxes to ensure that they don't get hit with any kind of fine or impact reputationally that would cause damage to the organization. Where they're expanding to is to be able to cover the broader scope of privacy program. And I think if you look into the green circle, in particular, as you get to that maintain aspect, is where you'll really start to see a lot of the enterprise architecture benefit come into play. And so you can imagine then that multinational organizations or larger organizations are somewhere in transition between that red circle and the green as they're expanding and growing on their maturity, working towards sustainability. Now, if I look at a couple of examples in that maintain section, data mapping and lifecycle visualization, we can draw context and information from the architectural data in order to support that. Having a privacy impact assessment, well, using the context of architecture will give me a more accurate privacy impact assessment because I'll be able to see which information is being utilized for which purposes, in which context, by which individuals, etc. And so the connectedness of an enterprise architecture really can strongly support that maintain initiative, as well as a few other facets of establish and evolve. As the maturity expands from, again, the red toward the green, you'll see more and more opportunity for enterprise architecture to come into play. So this next slide here, the 1 through 4, I've borrowed from the privacy and protection team at Mega. And taken this to show how we can illustrate from an enterprise architecture perspective how we, the architects, can support the needs of the data protection and privacy groups. So if you look at this view, that number 1, get visibility into how your company uses customer data. So again, think to examples I've mentioned of having process analysis views, having IT architectural views, and the information architecture and information flows that exist between them. You can start to develop business glossaries and know what is the information and why do I have it. Next, identify and track how data flows across your organization. So taking from those same architectural elements and being able to establish data lineage to see for a certain category or element of data, where does it go through? What systems is it touching or affected by? Where is it being modified? Understanding risk context and evolution. And anytime I see the word context, I immediately think to architecture and the value it can provide. So again, looking at risk in the context of process models that may be established, architectural models that may be established, information models to know where you may have a higher risk that needs to be mitigated. And then the prevention of violations and improving risk-aware decision-making. For me, this ties heavily into the privacy by design notion. This is really where we're going to leverage the practices in a joint effort. We're working together with the architecture team, the data protection privacy team, the security team, the risk team. We can really share information to have a notion that says if we're going to change our business models, we're going to leverage new technologies and deploy new processes. Before we do that, let's validate that we have all of the right to use the information the way we expect to, that it's secured properly, and that we're in compliance with all of the different regulations, not only those, by the way, that may come from the data protection and privacy realm, but you could imagine that I might have to adhere to GDPR and CCPA, but also HIPAA and or PCI. And so really bringing together this holistic approach to designing the evolution of the enterprise in a way that factors that in just keeps your organization ahead of the curve. With that being said, I'm going to pass control over to Rashi, who will then demonstrate some of what this might look like in the product set to illustrate some of what I described a moment ago. And from there, we'll, of course, then entertain questions. So thank you, everyone. Elspeth, if you could switch.
Sure. Give me one sec, Rashi, and I will give you control.
Perfect.
All right. I am passing control over to you now.
Perfect. Let's just make sure everything's set up. Are you able to see my screen well?
Let me see. What do you have on it right now?
It should be a PowerPoint. with the same slide that we just saw a second ago, the meet
Oh,
global
perfect. Yep,
regulations. Yes,
you are
I
good to
know it
go.
looks familiar. All right, I just want to make sure that we don't see this. 1 second.
You are good. It is just the
All
slide
right,
that's up.
awesome. That is absolutely fantastic. Okay, so we are, hi everyone, my name is Rashi, and I'm going to be walking you through a demonstration of how we can really leverage the artifacts from enterprise architecture to help our privacy team deliver deliver the value that they need to be able to show to their stakeholders. So to do that, we're going to walk through these 4 steps that are shown right here in order to really see how everything connects through HopeX. So let's get started by talking about how we can get visibility into your company by using customer data. And we're going to look at that from the viewpoint of privacy management itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and log into our platform as privacy management expert right here. Here we go. And once we log into this view of HopeX, we're going to get a chance to see all of, no, just 1 second. Here we go. We're going to get it. We're going to get a chance to see the desktop of our privacy management team. And now on this desktop, we're going to be able to see a lot of the different artifacts that they are going to be consuming from enterprise architecture itself. So if we just get started and talk a little bit about the key elements, what the point that I want to bring home is the information that you're going to be seeing here in terms of data categories, for example. All of this information can either be manually input by your privacy management team into the HopeX platform itself, or it can be imported from other areas of HopeX itself. So right now we just have the ability to see some of the data categories. Again, these data categories can be flowing between processes or between applications. From a privacy perspective, we're interested in understanding the retention period, the risk, the sensitivity of this particular data, so on and so forth. And additionally, your privacy team would be very interested in identifying the data subjects that are involved, and these would be the people or the personas. From an organizational perspective, the privacy team is very interested in understanding the legal entities, and more specifically, the departments that are a part of those legal entities. We often talk about departments and organizational units in the terms of process mapping, and when we actually go to see a process map, we'll see how these things are connected. From the privacy team's perspective, they are just consuming this information. So to continue that story of consuming data, you also have the ability to go ahead and actually just import the information that you are looking for. In this case, we're talking about a process map. So I'm just going to pull up a process map example to show you, both from a privacy perspective desktop, you have the ability to view this particular diagram. And then in a few moments, I'm going to log in as a process modeler itself so that we could have a look at how this kind of process map would be constructed from perhaps a business analyst working on the enterprise architecture team, or perhaps just with business itself. In this process map, we can see the exchange of data between different organizational units, maybe even departments. We can see application information, we can see risk information, and when we go into the processing side, we're going to be able to see similarly how all of these pieces are connected. You also have the ability to go ahead and import your entire list of applications. All of these applications are being used in IT portfolio management to manage your portfolio, as well as to be able to manage all of the different aspects, the life cycle of your application itself. After all of this information has been put into the tool, the privacy team is going to be creating a processing activity. A record of processing is a collection of the data objects, more specifically the data categories that are essential for this particular processing activity at this particular location. So if we take a look at some of the work inside this processing activity, you'll get a better understanding of why your privacy team would need these different individual artifacts from all of the parts of your enterprise architecture team. On the first page of your processing activity, you have basic information like the legal team, the legal entity, sorry, the department that is involved, as well as who is responsible for this particular processing activity. If we move on, we would be able to identify the legal basis. And in the detailed section, we'll start noticing some of the data categories that your privacy team will be consuming, as well as the data subject categories that they will be consuming in order to actually put this processing activity through assessment, and then, if necessary, run a DPIA. So when we come to the pre-assessment tab, we will be able to see in a quick snapshot that your privacy team is collecting information on compliance. Now, this information is incredibly important when we are working with auditors, and we need to be able to provide this information in a report-like format for what is happening with the data in your company. In the history section, we're able to see all of the information that is recorded for previous assessments that were done for this particular processing activity. And if one of the subsequent actions is to run a DPIA, you also have the ability to do that. So among the deliverables that would be produced by the privacy team in this entire list of processing activities, you would have the ability to go ahead and extract the record of processing report itself, which would have all of the information that I just showed you, but in a Word document, so that that information can then be shared with all of the other regulatory bodies that would need to be able to access that information to see how the data is transmitted within your company. There are other reports that your processing team will need to pull. One of those reports can be the record of DPIA. We were just taking a look at the call center record of processing activity. And if I come to this particular page, I can run a report for that DPIA itself. And again, this information can then be shared outside of the HOPEX platform with other people that need to be able to access it. There is another view that we can look at. Oftentimes, we are interested in how data is being transferred across borders. If you have a company that has presence in many different countries, this is something that would be of vital importance to your privacy team to be able to see in a quick snapshot view, red depicting if you are meeting regulation, whatever the necessary regulations for the inbound, outbound data flow for that country would be, green to show if you are. And again, this is helping you assess the health of how all of the data that your company is responsible for is fitting into the regulations themselves. The last report that I want to show you quickly is the data subject rights report. Now, in this particular report, we are able to see, again, just in a very quick snapshot, all of the different processing activities that are happening, as well as the data subject rights for those particular processing activities. And we're able to see where the work still needs to be done. This particular pieces of data is actually something that application owners can help us fill out. And that's when we move on to that side of the platform, we're going to really be able to see how different members of the enterprise architecture team can help to flesh out some of the details and information that is consumed by the privacy team to help create these deliverables. So come back to our PowerPoint, we will see that we've just taken a moment to talk about how we can get visibility into our company using customer data. We're now going to move on and talk about how we can identify and track the data flow across our organization. So I'm just going to go ahead and log out of HOPEX from the privacy perspective and log back in from an information architecture perspective. In this particular user profile, I'm going to be able to see, again, how we can identify and track how our data flows. A lot of the work that our enterprise architects have been doing is already fleshing out all of the details that we need. For example, when we are creating process maps, we are identifying the flow of our data. When we're creating system flows and ecosystem diagrams, we are again identifying how that data is flowing, but this time between different applications. So this data lineage is something that can automatically be generated based off of all of those flows, touch points is a better word, all of the different touch points between the different pieces of architecture. In this example, we can see that the concept of customer moves from our application of web portal in the sales department, gets converted into the concept of customer in the CRM system, is then consumed and used by logistics, and it flows straight on through to our accountability department. And this is, in a nutshell, again, the overarching picture, the data lineage of the concept of customer. This is something I just want to reiterate this point because it is so incredibly powerful that HopeX is able to generate for you again automatically at a click of a button. And to show that, I'm going to show you a very simple example. We're going to create a new data lineage. We're just going to leave the object type as concept, and we're going to look at the example of booking. And I click on next. That creates this instance for me. And when I click on the create diagram button and we initialize this diagram, HopeX will provide a wizard pop-up for us to be able to see what are all of the different connection points. How and where is this particular data flowing? If we are happy with all of this that we are seeing, we can click on next. And what you'll notice is a diagram has been automatically created, again, based off of how the booking the booking concept is flowing between these two application systems. If we go back to our PowerPoint, we have just talked about how we can identify and track how data flows across our organization, which means we are ready to start understanding the risk context and evolution. To do that, we're going to log in now, not as an information architect, but as a process modeler. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and log out of this particular profile and log back in as a process modeler. And when we log into the HopeX platform, again, just to talk a little bit about stylistically what's going on, we've been logging in with different users and different profiles, and the home screens have been slightly different. Again, that's to cater to the unique working environments to each of the profiles that I'm logging in with. But if you'll notice, the concepts that we're talking about are still the same. We're talking about processes and data flowing. We're talking about risk. And again, all of these objects are connected on the HopeX platform. We saw this diagram previously from a privacy management perspective, and now we are seeing it from a process modeling perspective, simply meaning that this particular profile is the one who created this artifact. They would be the one that would be responsible for identifying how the data is actually flowing and what pieces of data are actually flowing between our different, in this case, organizational units. When we are creating our process diagram, we also have the ability to identify important and critical KPIs for the company, as well as the data itself that is associated. We can identify additional applications that are going to be invoked by this particular process. And when we move into our fourth piece for this demonstration, we're going to take a deeper look into this billing application and see the additional layers of data that are involved there. And when it comes to understanding our risk context, from a processing perspective, we have the ability to link our risk in this process view itself. That way we can identify risks in the context of a process. Again, this information, risk information and data object information is going to be consumed by your privacy team in order to create a record of processing. But as enterprise architects, we are often creating these artifacts to tell a different story. From a processing perspective, we are connecting risk information to help us understand what are some of the critical steps of our processes. But the same piece of information can be consumed by your privacy team to help them create the appropriate record of processing activities. The final step that we're going to be talking about today is how we can prevent violations and improve risk-aware decision-making. In order to do that, we're going to log out of our business process and analyst view and log in as an IT portfolio manager. Now, from the viewpoint of an IT portfolio manager, we're going to be able to see an entire list of applications. Now, these applications can be broken down into particular portfolios in order to, again, consume that information from particular vantage points. But for us, we're interested in seeing our entire list of applications because we want to maintain all of the metadata for this as well. We want to be able to see our current state, the expenses, technology compliance, and so on and so forth. But if we actually dig into the properties or the ID card of a particular example of a particular application, we'll be able to see that along with the usual metadata that you are interested in, like cloud computing or application type, we also have an area where we can begin understanding what are the data, the pieces of data itself that this application is going to be either using or pushing or being responsible for. So both input and outputs. And we are able to see, again, the data categories themselves. We're able to see the same contract data that we saw from the privacy perspective, and we are able to understand how it is being used by booking and the fact that the billing application is also involved in this particular transaction. You also have the ability to go ahead and identify how this data can be accessed by talking about data creation, the data being read, the data being updated, or the data being deleted. This is the first time we're able to actually signify all of these rules. But if we take this a step further and we move down into the data subject rights and notice management section, this is where we can really see that non-privacy individuals like application owners can really aid in the privacy management journey. You have the ability to go ahead and specify the different data subject rights as well as the notice management here for the first time. And when your privacy team receives this information, they will have the ability to update and refine that information. But this is the first example in which we're actually able to see how HOPEX can help you centrally manage compliance. We saw it from a process modeling perspective, we saw it from an application perspective, and we saw it from an information architecture perspective. So if we just go back and do a quick recap about what we just saw in our demonstration, we started off by mapping our processing activities and identifying where that personal data was processed and documented. Then we moved into creating a shared privacy vocabulary by identifying our business critical KPIs, risks, data objects. We were then able to leverage HOPEX's multi-user features to centrally manage that compliance. We saw it both from an application perspective, from a processing perspective, and from an information perspective. And by being able to distribute privacy management and the related tasks to the appropriate stakeholders, we are really able to begin practicing privacy by design. And this allows you to leverage the different parts of enterprise architecture to help prevent privacy violations. And with that, I thank you very much for attending this demonstration, and I will hand it back to Elspeth.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rashi. That was an excellent demo. Daniel, thank you at the beginning for kind of coming in and setting the stage. Great presentations from both of you, so really appreciate it. To all of our attendees, again, like we said earlier on, this has been it's an interesting time that we're in right now. So we truly appreciate you spending a little bit of your time today with Mega. Thank you for your interest in this webinar. Thank you for supporting Mega. We are here to meet all of your needs, and we are very happy to have you joining us today. Everybody who registered for this webinar, not just attended, but everyone who registered, those that were here today and those that weren't able to make it, I'm going to be sending a recording of this webinar to all registrants. As you kind of digest what you heard today, or if you want to rewatch the webinar and questions bubble up, feel free to write back to me. You'll have my email address, and I will forward your questions on to Daniel or Rashi, or if it's not one of them, I'll forward it on to somebody else who could answer. So again, feel free to send me your questions if anything comes up as you've digested everything you've seen today, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. And again, just to wrap up, thank you so much for your time today, and we wish everyone a very pleasant rest of their day. And Daniel and Rashi, thank you again to you.
Thanks,
Take care,
everybody.
everybody. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.